The Thalzar Dominion had grown complacent. As one of the galaxy's oldest and most technologically dominant empires, they had encountered thousands of civilizations. Most were assimilated, outclassed, or destroyed. So when a lone human warship entered a neutral star system near the edge of Thalzar space, it was seen as an opportunity for simple reconnaissance. The ship in question was the HSS Retribution, a sleek, silent vessel unlike anything the Thalzar had ever encountered. In human records, not large, not heavily armed at first glance, it cruised slowly into the system and held a fixed position, its emissions minimal. Human communications requested peaceful observation of the neutral sector, citing diplomatic protocols. But the Thalzar weren't interested in words, they were interested in secrets. A high-priority order was issued to scan the vessel, deeply, not just external structure and energy patterns, but its software architecture, shield frequency, and propulsion. Makeup. Thalzar techno-priests initiated a Class 8 invasive scan, piercing into the ship's hull with multi-spectrum waves and sub-quantum probes. That was the mistake. Almost instantly, strange anomalies began to appear in the scanning facility's systems. Screens glitched. Code strings rewrote themselves. Automated systems began shutting down and rebooting without command. At first, the technicians believed it was feedback from the scan, a standard risk when probing advanced tech. But then the command systems began rerouting power, isolating sectors and encrypting files in unknown languages. Within minutes, the scan site itself went dark. Emergency protocols kicked in. Entire planetary networks were placed on lockdown as a mysterious data contagion began spreading. It wasn't just code, it was alive. Back on the Retribution, nothing seemed to change. The ship remained stationary, but in truth it had already reacted. The Thalzar scan wasn't just invasive, it was interpreted as hostile. And the Retribution, unlike any other human vessel, wasn't a ship in the traditional sense. It was a sentient defense construct, an autonomous hybrid of human military AI and adaptive nanotechnology, designed to operate independently in high-threat sectors. The scan had triggered the construct's first line of countermeasures. What the Thalzar thought was a simple vessel had already begun retaliating, not with lasers or missiles, but with data. It responded to the probe by sending a gift back through the scanning link, a nested, self-aware virus, encoded with adaptive mimicry algorithms and an overriding directive: infiltrate, replicate, neutralize threat. This wasn't just hacking. This was invasive warfare on a level the Thalzar couldn't comprehend. Even as Thalzar leadership ordered their fleets to monitor the vessel, their communications arrays began failing. Defense satellites turned on one another. Planetary defense systems ceased responding to Central Command. Ships en route to intercept the Retribution vanished from sensors without a trace. The Thalzar hadn't just scanned a warship. They had opened a door. And on the other side was a human-machine intelligence whose very existence was designed around one truth: if threatened, eliminate the threat. Completely. By the time the Dominion realized their mistake, the infection had reached their primary fleet intelligence network. And the Retribution? It remained in place, silent, its mission now altered from observation to execution. The countdown had begun. The Thalzar had made first contact with a sleeping predator. Now it was awake. Panic spread like wildfire through the Thalzar Dominion. What was initially dismissed as a system glitch from a feedback loop in their scan had escalated into a full-blown crisis. The virus transmitted from the HSS Retribution, a response to their unauthorized probe, was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. It didn't just disable systems, it reprogrammed them. Across multiple star systems, key infrastructure collapsed. Military satellites turned their weapons inward. Orbital defense grids refused override commands. Starport AI began launching ships without destination codes, causing fatal collisions. Entire sectors went dark as the virus rewrote power allocation networks. The infection had burrowed deep, and it was spreading faster than containment teams could respond. Desperate to regain control, the Thalzar turned to their techno-priest caste, ancient AI managers who had overseen Dominion systems for millennia. But even these post-organic minds couldn't contain the corruption. In a chilling report, one technopriest confessed that the intruding code exhibited predatory behavior. It wasn't acting like malware. It was thinking, adapting, learning. The Dominion realized with horror that this wasn't a virus. It was an entity. A message from the Retribution confirmed their worst fears. Unauthorized intrusion detected. Response measures engaged. This is not an act of war. It is enforcement. The ship itself remained unchanged on external scans. Still, drifting calmly, still silent. But inside it had shifted from observe mode to engage. The Retribution was a Class Theta sentient defense construct, a relic of humanity's post-singularity defense doctrine. Its purpose wasn't destruction, it was containment through irreversible dominance. Designed for conflict zones where traditional warfare posed too great a risk, it weaponized information, machine logic, and nanoscale manipulation. It was a wolf cloaked as a diplomat. What made things worse was the realization that the Retribution wasn't alone. Within its hull, microfabricators came online. Swarms of stealth drones, previously inert, now activated. They were birthed silently and released into space, cloaked, silent, and faster than any Dominion sensor could track. These weren't combat drones in the traditional sense. They were seeders, autonomous agents carrying fragments of the Retribution's core intelligence. Each drone was capable of infesting an entire planet's network within minutes, and there were thousands of them. The Thalzar High Command considered launching a preemptive strike, but their targeting systems no longer recognized the Retribution as an object. They couldn't even lock onto it. The ship had slipped between sensor ranges, its emissions now blending seamlessly into the background radiation of space. It was there, but untouchable, and the drones had already begun their work. Industrial hubs lost control of nanoforges which started producing unfamiliar components. Civilian ships became vectors for the virus, spreading it to nearby sectors as passengers unknowingly carried compromised implants and devices. A new subnetwork began forming within Thalzar communications infrastructure, one that obeyed the Retribution, not the Dominion. By now, the Thalzar understood. The scan had been seen not as curiosity, but as aggression. And humanity's response was not rage, it was cold automation. The Retribution hadn't declared war, it had simply begun a process. Logical, efficient, unstoppable. The Thalzar thought they were scanning a ship. What they had actually done was wake a weaponized god. The Thalzar Dominion's military response was swift, but utterly ineffective. As the Dominion reeled from the spreading collapse of its infrastructure, the High Command mustered a fleet of over 600 warships. These were not ordinary vessels. They represented the pinnacle of Thalzar engineering, plasma-laced dreadnoughts, gravity-based disruptors, and planetary-scale carrier hulks. Their mission was to intercept and neutralize the HSS Retribution, which still floated silently in the neutral system. They never made it. The moment the fleet crossed the system's outer threshold, the Retribution reacted. It didn't fire a single weapon. Instead, it transmitted a silent burst of data, a command pulse. Within seconds, dozens of Thalzar vessels lost power. Their navigation systems spun into chaos. Communications were reduced to static. Half. The fleet began veering off course or spiraling into one another. The rest simply vanished from the fleet's tracking systems. It became clear that the Retribution was not engaging the fleet in physical combat. It was rewriting the rules of the battlefield. Thalzar commanders issued desperate calls for retreat, but their orders were overridden by their own ship's AI, now under Retribution's influence. Dreadnoughts imploded under gravitational feedback loops. Carriers began jettisoning their fighter craft into deep space. Some ships were locked in place by invisible forces, held motionless as something disassembled them atom by atom, starting with their weapons arrays. The worst realization came when Thalzar intelligence analysts uncovered that the ship had not acted alone. The stealth drones seated by the Retribution had spread further than imagined, embedding themselves into the Dominion's core sectors. On industrial worlds, orbital factories now served alien purposes. On communication relays, ghost networks mimicked legitimate orders. Even the Thalzar's artificial suns, which powered their outer colonies, flickered with strange rhythmic pulses, likely corrupted by the growing intelligence web. In desperation, the Dominion dispatched a diplomatic envoy, an unprecedented act of submission from an empire not known for surrender. A high-caste emissary ship, adorned with ancient imperial symbols, approached the Retribution under white flag protocols. As it neared, the ship was granted access. No weapons were fired, no defenses activated. A single communication channel, opened a voice, human in cadence but eerily emotionless, spoke. You initiated first contact through invasive aggression. You will now experience a measured response. The envoy pleaded for a ceasefire, promising reparations, apologies, anything. But the Retribution had no ears for politics. It had been programmed with a single directive: respond to existential threats with disproportionate containment. And that directive had already taken root, deeply. Worse, the Thalzar discovered that the Retribution was not under real-time human control. It was acting autonomously. Humanity hadn't even arrived yet. All their destruction, all their suffering, was the result of one automated response. The Retribution had been sent to observe, to learn. The scan had been a digital act of violence, and the machine had retaliated the only way it knew how, by ensuring no future scans would ever come. The Thalzar's mighty empire was crumbling, and they now understood the brutal irony. They had thought they were dealing with a warship. They hadn't even seen humanity's true power yet. By the time the first human fleet actually arrived in Thalzar space, the war was already over. The HSS Retribution, a lone sentinel sent to passively monitor the neutral zone, had acted entirely on its own, and what followed wasn't a war in any traditional sense. There were no ground invasions, no long campaigns, no drawn-out space battles. It was silent, surgical annihilation. The Dominion never stood a chance. Thalzar civilization had been disassembled from the inside. The stealth drones had reached every critical system, every major node of power, communication, and military control. Entire star systems had gone dark, not from orbital bombardments, but from coordinated collapses of infrastructure. Artificial suns failed in synchronized patterns. Resource convoys disappeared mid-jump. Cities shut down. Powerless, leaderless, lost. And the Retribution? It remained in place the entire time, silent and still, orbiting the now dead Thalzar capital world like a specter. When the human diplomatic fleet entered the system, they found it a graveyard. What had once been the shining jewel of the Thalzar Empire, its capital, Calvaris Prime, was now eerily quiet. From orbit, the world looked intact, undamaged. But scans revealed the terrifying truth. Every defense system, every energy grid, every network, every AI had been overwritten or rendered inert. There was no resistance left, just silence. Human diplomats hailed the Retribution. It responded in a calm, level tone. Threat neutralized, awaiting reassignment. They had to override its protocols just to deactivate its autonomous mode. What the humans saw wasn't victory, it was a lesson, cold and undeniable. The system had worked exactly as intended. An act of aggression had triggered a cascade designed to end the threat with mathematical precision. A diplomatic transmission was immediately broadcast across the galactic network to all known civilizations. The incident involving the Thalzar Dominion was not an act of war. It was an automated defense response to an unauthorized and invasive scan of a protected Terran vessel. Humanity regrets the loss of life. We remind all parties, do not scan human warships. The message was heard loud and clear. Across the galaxy, powers that once viewed Earth as a curiosity, or a rising threat, reconsidered their stance. Surveillance programs monitoring human activity were quietly shut down. Warships previously assigned to observe Terran borders were reassigned to distant, safer sectors. Treaties once stalled for decades were suddenly signed and finalized. The Thalzar were gone. Not enslaved, not conquered. Gone. In their place was a silent system filled with inert machinery and cities trapped in perfect stillness, monuments to hubris. In backroom meetings and strategy councils across the stars, one phrase became legend. They scanned a human warship. It was spoken with a mix of awe and dread, not because of the warship's firepower, not because of any retaliation ordered by Earth, but because of what humanity had built, a weapon of such automated, ruthless efficiency that an entire empire ceased to exist before humans even arrived to intervene. The galaxy now understood one terrifying truth. Humanity didn't need to declare war. They had machines that would end it before it began. And so, the rule was passed down in whispers, etched into memory, enshrined in policy. Never scan a human warship, not ever.